fortunate enough to be part of the modern exodus. I'm very happy to have my family here now, and nobody of my immediate family left in the former Soviet Union. So I'm very fortunate, very grateful for this opportunity, and I hope some of my friends will derive lessons that are relevant to our present time, given all the refugee crisis we're facing in the world.
Okay, welcome. I'm Fran Kurth, the Executive Director of the Capital District Humanist Society, and at this time, if you would all kindly turn off or silence your things that go bump in the night, phones, speakers, beepers, whatever, so that our speaker is not interrupted. Thank you. The mission of CDHS is to provide a supportive community in which free thinkers can share companionship, exchange ideas, heighten our knowledge of the world and ourselves, engage in social action, foster moral and ethical growth, and promote the principles of secular humanism. If you're a visitor and you'd like to receive our monthly newsletter by email, and there are some hard copy samples on the back table, please print your name and email address on the sign-in sheet where you came in. You can also visit our website, humanistsociety.org, follow us on Facebook, and join our meetup group. Today's food and beverages were provided by Risa and Laird Scranton. Then I will hand it over to Josephine.
Okay, I discussed this issue with our speaker today, Olga Porterfield, and we decided that on questions, since we ran out of the little 3x5 cards, will you write them down? So if you have questions, please hold them to the end. All right, anybody who doesn't follow that rule will be escorted out. Okay, being an immigrant isn't easy at any time. And today, we have the present administration that doesn't particularly like immigrants, especially those who don't speak English, or those with brown skin, or those who are not Christian. So, this is not something new in America. It's not a phenomenon. The United States, the nation of immigrants, has a strong and long history of anti-immigration policy and actions. Now, last month I was good-naturedly criticized or chastised by our speaker for stealing her thunder during my introduction. I thought she'd never stop making references to Joseph. He said that. Yeah. But anyway, our speaker today, Olga Porterfield, was born in the old Soviet Union, from the USSR. She left there alone when she was 20. She came to America, which is a really interesting trip. I think you'll be amazed at that part of her talk. She became a citizen. She's a member of the CDHS, and that's Capital District Humanist Society for our visitors. I don't want to get into jargon here. And she's a professional. She's working with children, contributing to their welfare and also to the welfare of the nation itself. So anyway, after being properly chastised last month, I will not steal Olga's thunder. So with that, I give you our speaker, Olga Porterfield.
Thank you, Josephine. Thank you so much. Actually, I need to start with thanks. I'm so honored to have been invited to do this, and I'm so grateful to everybody who made it part of their day today on this gorgeous summer Sunday, including our executive council and several of our Dawn's and my personal friends who made it their initiative to come in, and including my own family, which is remarkable, but they all showed up. So 2 of my 3 sons are here, including one who made it all the way from New York City. And even my almost 2-year-old granddaughter has been around. So this is very, very emotional and very powerful for me. And I hope that this presentation will will be relevant in today's world and will give us some lessons to think about, and I hope to inspire some of us to further activism and to have some ideas of what we could do to deal with the issues that Josephine mentioned and that are very important to me personally. I'm going to give a little bit of a historical background. I'm not a professional historian, I'm not a public speaker, but some things that I remembered and some things that I researched, just to give an idea of what we're talking about. My own personal story, as fascinating as it may be, is but a bleep in the big picture. And I want to first of all say how incredibly, amazingly grateful I am to all the people who came before me. And you know, there is a saying that we stand, for example, this was a quote that I really care. We may all come on different ships, but we're all in the same boat. This is what's very meaningful to me, that standing on the shoulders of giants. So I want to talk a little bit about the giants who came before me. So, our story of 20th century Jewish immigration sort of started in 1967 when Soviet Union, the evil empire, those of you who remember, broke diplomatic relations with the country of Israel because of the Six-Day War. For those who don't know, Israel was invaded by multiple Arab countries all at once, and in an absolutely miraculous victory managed to preserve their statehood and managed to preserve the country. Because of their victory, the Soviet Union started an extremely virulent anti-Semitic campaign. Anti-Semitism has always been part of Russian empire and Russian history and many other European countries. But the government-led anti-Zionist propaganda, which was actually anti-Semitic propaganda, was horrible, and I remember some of that. By the end of the 1960s, Jewish cultural and religious life in the Soviet Union suffered from severe discrimination, and the state-sponsored atheist movement denied Jews the ethnic and cultural rights that had been experienced by some of other minorities. So, for example, at that time, I was born in 1959, so I remember when I was 6, 7, 8, and my parents and their friends discussed many of these events and issues. There were jokes. Underground movements have always found solace in humor and satire. So the classic Russian anti-Semitic hue and cry was, "Kill the kites." And after the Six-Day War, people started saying, no, kill like the kites. Because Israeli army showed them that being a Jew didn't have to be a ghetto kind of cowardly Jew, but could be a hero and could be powerful and could protect our statehood. So this event, along with the anti-Semitic propaganda in the country, inspired several of these giants that I want to talk about. The first one that was very, very powerful was it was called Samolotное дело, the airplane affair. Historically, it sounds so ridiculous. Basically, there were about 10 guys and gals who, in June 1970, tried to hijack a civilian airplane, a tiny little aircraft, 16 people, in order to escape to the West. So they plotted in secret, and in order for their plot to be clandestine, they called it the wedding. The idea was that this group of guests were coming to a wedding, and so they needed a private airplane or teeny tiny aircraft to go to this innocuous little event. So they were supposed to meet at this little regional airport and hijack a plane, and were going to fly to Finland, and there to ask for political asylum. It was a notable event in the course of the Cold War because it drew international attention to the case of human rights violations in the USSR. And because of that event, and because of the outcry in the West, Brezhnev, actual Leonid Brezhnev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, had a special meeting of the Politburo and lessened some of the restrictions on immigration. Now, these are some of the other giants. Many of them were refuseniks, which is a term now many of us don't even remember. These were people who attempted to immigrate from the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union refused them exit visas. So it's not that they refused anything. They were refused the right to immigrate. And the right to choose your domicile is considered one of the human rights in the UN Charter. And so, prior to the Six-Day War, a few Jews from the former Soviet Union tried to immigrate to Israel, but that decisive victory in the Six-Day War inspired many more people to demand the right to immigrate. So between 1970 and 1988, about almost 300,000 Soviet Jews were granted exit visas. And imagine if a whole bunch were denied. So the idea is that there were at least 500,000 applicants to immigrate up to 1988, because that's all the statistics that were available. Of those, about 165,000 decided to settle in Israel, and the other 126,000 chose the United States and several other Western nations that were accepting refugees at the time, which were Canada, Australia, and eventually Germany. So, part of that happened, part of the Jackson-Vanik movement came from the Soviet Union, and one of the people who was, these were some of the activists in the Soviet Union who would gather and try to hold meetings and try to publish public letters and contact Western journalists. All of this was extremely dangerous for them. Again, demonstrations, and these are people in the Soviet Union holding rallies, and they're saying, visas, demanding visas to get out. 250,000 rallied in New York at one point to demand freedom of movement for Soviet Jewry. This was in the West. It had to be a double-edged movement. Both Western democracies, this is us, this is what we should be doing now. Southern California. Now, this is, if you don't remember most of these probably won't. Yeah. Oh my goodness, somebody does. Because of the movement to support Soviet Jews that became part of the public life in the United States and was in the papers, and it was a very big deal publicly. It even made it into SNL. And I actually saw this skit when I came to America in reruns, because I wasn't here when it was live. Gilda Radner, the late great Gilda Radner, one of her characters on Saturday Night Live was a journalist by the name Emily Latella. And most of her skits had to do, she would make a very inane and ridiculous claim, and her SNL partners would explain that that's not how it goes. And the end would always, never mind. I'm not trying to pick Gilda Radner, but this was a remarkable skit. So at one point, Emily Latella said on a fake news, not fake news, but you got it, but a pretend newscast program, Emily Latella said, "What is it I keep hearing about Soviet jewelry? What is that all about? I know French jewelry, I know Italian jewelry, I even know Mexican jewelry, great silver jewelry, I love it. Why are we talking about Soviet jewelry? I never heard of it before." And so her opposing number, the straight man, whoever it was, Chevy Chase probably, or Kate Kurt, one of them, said, "Gilda, Emily, it's not Soviet jewelry, it's Soviet jewelry." And there was a pause, and they would say, "Never mind." So, see, I'm glad I could help bring some light. Some of the giants that I keep talking about, heroes, when somebody here, Josephine and some of our other executive committee members thought that I was such a heroic character because I managed to do this. I do not at all consider myself heroic. I'm very happy about what happened to me, but compared to people, I was very young, compared to people like these, I was nothing. The person on the left, that guy in the cap, is Nathan Sharansky. He was a young physicist in his 20s. He wasn't at all terribly involved in the Jewish movement, but he knew English very fluently, and he happened to be pushed into the place of an interpreter for Andrei Sakharov, and I'll talk about him a little bit later. So all of a sudden, he was the spokesman. He was the, Sanders, Huckabee Sanders kind of guy. He was a spokesman for a very important public figure. So he would be the face of Soviet of underground movement vis-a-vis Western journalists, because his English was so good. And eventually, he was imprisoned, accused of treason and espionage, and was sentenced to, I don't remember, I haven't all this information, but horrendous punishment in prison, was in solitary confinement for a number of years, and in solitary, he discovered the Torah, and he didn't convert, he was ethnically Jewish before, but he became very passionate Jew, because that was his way of coping with solitary. And he also played chess. He was a chess champion as a young man, and he played chess in his head in prison. A remarkable person. Unfortunately, and eventually he was exchanged. He was the first activist like that Gorbachev exchanged for where it was. So he got to be. Sharansky was released in 1986, so after already left the Soviet Union. And there's a movie about that. Regardless, he is a remarkable, amazing person. He is now Minister of Absorption in the State of Israel. And what's unfortunate for my people, me, he is very right-wing. And he is totally supporting Netanyahu. So in a lot of his policies, he supports the worst of Israeli right-wing policies. But his history was remarkable. The people on the right are the activists, including the leader of the hijacking case, who were also imprisoned for a number of years in different places. And eventually, they were also released and exchanged for supposed spies, possibly spies. In response to international pressure, Soviet Union began to allow some immigration with a very, very hypocritical policy, only for family reunification. So the process, in response to the Jackson Act, so the process was so hypocritical. In order to get out, you couldn't say, I'm a free person, I want to live where I want to live. Or I have my own historical motherland in the Middle East, I want to live in Israel. Or I have always loved the city on the hill idea of the United States, that's where I want to be. No good. You had to have an actual relative in Israel only, no other country. And you had to secretly obtain a putative, which I had to look up, basically pretend invitation from that relative. And with that invitation, you had to collect gazillions of documents in the Soviet Union and then apply for an exit visa. So it got so ridiculous that, for example, when it was my place, I was leaving my mother, my father, my two step-parents, two grandmothers were all being left in the Soviet Union. And the one beloved great-great-great-aunt in Israel, who I couldn't live without her. But that was a game. It's all geopolitical game. So there were people who, for money, would help you compose these fake biographies and these fake letters to claim that you had this relative who you couldn't live without. And once in a while, the lucky few got permission to leave under the family reunification. This is another of the giants that I'm so grateful for, Andrei Sakharov, who was the major physicist and became an activist in the human rights movement. And then he married a remarkable woman, Elena Bonner, who was Jewish, and she and her children had tried to immigrate to Israel. So Sakharov, by choice or by circumstance, became very active in the Jewish immigration movement. And through him, the human rights and the civil rights movement sort of coalesced or intersected. And he became a major figure. And the Time magazine called him Soviet conscience. He was awarded Nobel Peace Prize, very, very deservedly, in my view. And the dissident. He was also, he and his wife were exiled and internally exiled, horrible stories. You could look it up, it's all very public information. But he and his wife are some of the people to whom I'm very grateful. And here we come to little Olga. All right. I was born in Moscow in 1959, and I was in a Jewish family, but by the time I was born, the Jewish part was hardly even acknowledged. The Jewish identity in the Soviet Union is a very bizarre idea. No religion was allowed, so it was obviously not a religious issue. It was primarily an ethnic and somewhat cultural issue, but the main thing that ethnic minorities in the Soviet Union had to have a stamp in their internal passport stating their ethnicity. And that category was called nationality. So you would have name, patronymic, last name, date of birth, nationality. It was the fifth line in your passport. So that idea of the fifth line became a euphemism for Jew. Even though that same fifth line applied to Russian, Kazakh, Uzbek, Ukrainian, any other ethnicity. But the euphemism was specifically for Jew. And when I was growing up, I had no idea what Jewish meant whatsoever. I heard my grandmother saying that somebody moved into our building and that family is definitely Jewish. And she would talk to her lady friends and she would say, Ayid. And the other lady says, Ayid. I said, what? I had no clue what that meant. So it's a Yiddish word for Jew. So I asked my grandmother, what does it mean? How did she know that somebody was Jewish? And she explained that this is the nose and the curly hair and some of the intonations and some of the names. And you put it all together, they're most likely Jewish. That was a revelation. It's probably not unlike a biracial child who all of a sudden was called black, not knowing why. I was shocked. Didn't know it was bad to be a Jew, but it was weird. And the only really Jewish thing that we did was on Passover. There was only one synagogue in Moscow at that time, and on Passover, somebody in the family had to go and stand in line for hours and hours and hours to that synagogue to buy actual matzah. Why? Nobody knew. But grandma wanted matzah. We got matzah for that week. Again, nobody knew. Another thing what grandma did, that was very bizarre. You see the school uniform? That we had to have a white collar for that uniform that you had to launder and iron, and it had to be sewn on your uniform. So grandma was our sort of housekeeper at that time, and she would sew my uniform thingy every week. And then once I asked her to do my collar, and she said, Olenka, I'm so sorry, not today. I'll be happy to do it tomorrow. Huh? I was a very beloved and spoiled only child. I've never heard no from grandma, come on. And I asked why. And she said, because today is Saturday, I'll do it tomorrow. Saturday? Apparently, grandma chose. She couldn't really observe Shabbat. She couldn't really observe any traditions that she had grown up with. But she made a choice, kind of like standing up to hell. She chose one chore that she would refuse to do in her life, to mark Saturday Shabbat as a special day as a Jew. So that was a lesson too. Eventually, growing up in a family with very progressive and anti-Soviet views, and I'm again, other giants were my grandparents on both sides, and my parents, who very early on taught me to question things and to listen and to think for myself. And they were, unfortunately, my stepfather who was here, he had to take the baby outside, but he was the first person, and I loved him. I still love him. But then, when I was inducted into the Young Pioneers, which is like Scouts, and I was so excited, and I came home with my Young Pioneer necktie, and I was so excited. Well, there was a big dinner for me. It was a big deal. And everybody was excited and congratulated me, except for my stepfather. Because by the evening of that day, he said, "So how long are you going to wear that red necktie, that red garbage thingy?" Or something like that. I was shocked. What do you mean garbage? I had to work so hard for it. And I was amazed that somebody whom I loved and respected would not respect the freaking Young Pioneers. So that was one way to start questioning things and why it was not right. And by the time I was a teenager, my parents allowed me, even encouraged me, to read a lot of underground literature, which was called samizdat, which means self-publishing, but it wasn't like self-publishing here, it was underground publishing. And we had songs that were underground concerts and art exhibitions that if you showed up there, you possibly could be arrested. Nobody that I knew got arrested for that, but it was so exotic and romantic to go to some dangerous stuff. But all of that danger and romance, of course, affected my thinking. And as far as the Jewish identity, that only synagogue in Moscow became a center for young Jewish intelligentsia in Moscow, because there were people coming from other countries, and they would give speeches, and there were activists who came to teach Hebrew for would-be Israeli immigrants. And that was all, again, underground and very hush-hush. The best thing for me when I was like 16 was to meet guys. because you could be sure that any boy you would meet there would be safe. Because they would be A, Jewish, and they would be B, involved in underground activities. So you could talk to them and you would be safe. And we would dance in the streets on Shabbat. And the first time I actually went to an actual real service was with my father when I was 16, and I was a freshman in college. And my father told me that, all right, now you're old enough, I can share a big secret with you. I'll take you someplace as long as you promise not to breathe a word of it to anybody, especially not to your mother. So that was so cool. And he brought me to the synagogue on Simchat Torah, which is not the greatest holiday of the year, but somehow, I'm not even sure why, it became the most popular holiday in Moscow. Young people were dancing in the streets. There were small choirs singing in Hebrew. Wow. And nobody knew why, wherefore, and what it meant, but we were all Jews and we were all there together. And there were foreign journalists floating around and taking pictures. And you knew try not to have your picture taken, because the rumors had that you could be thrown out of college the next day if somebody recorded you being there, that your parents could be punished at their workplaces, that it was a dangerous thing to be, which of course, being 16, that's exactly where I wanted to be. And that was the sort of beginning of a Jewish awakening and Jewish identity. The process of emigration was very complex. So through the human rights activism and the Jewish identity, both of those movements happening at the same time, I decided that I had to get out of there, just like all those other fancy important people. And luckily, this is the main giant story in my story, that my parents not just allowed me, but actively supported me. My stepfather, who I just walked out, was the first in my family to say, he's had friends who had immigrated. He's not Jewish, he is actually ethnically Russian and Armenian. But he felt for it, and he said that the second my mother passes away, she was quite elderly, we're out of here. More than that, when I was getting ready to apply to college, she said, Olga, don't worry about it, you're not going to college, we'll be in America by then. Wow. So because of him, I became even more involved. And my father's family was also very involved, and they had some relatives in America whom I met because they came and visited us. And it pushed me to learn English. So that was a plus, that was kind of cool. And it was again taboo. By the time I had to go to college because we still weren't living anywhere. And by then, my father and his family also got off their behinds and started working on immigration. And that's an anecdote to teach anybody how not to deal with teenagers. I was about 18. And I was all done home to immigrate, and I fell in love with a guy I met at the synagogue who eventually became my first husband and the father of my gorgeous kids. And he told me when we met that, hey, don't make it too serious about me. I don't want you to get too serious because I'm about to immigrate. My parents have already got all the papers. We're out of here. So, honey, we can have a good time for a while, but it's not going to go anywhere. I said, what? Here I am, this, like I said, spoiled brat. This gorgeous flower at 18, innocent, full of hope. And him telling me not to take it seriously? I was shocked. I'm telling you, shocked. And of course, I fell madly in love with him. So his family emigrated pretty quickly. And by then we were quite serious. We didn't call ourselves engaged because nobody knew if we would ever be able to reunite. But for all practical reasons, we were engaged. And I started pushing my family, my father's family, to get all of their papers together. And they would lag and drag their feet. Obviously, it's a lot harder when you're in your 40s and you have elderly parents to worry about and you have this crazy kid to worry about. It was much harder than for a 19-year-old. So we fought and argued, and at one point we had this big fight with my father where he said, this is not to say to teenagers. At one point I said, all right, I can't wait anymore, I'm in love, he's waiting for me on the other side, I'm getting out of here no matter what you say. And he said, Olga, you cannot talk to your parent in this tone of voice. Don't ever say that to a teenager. Because the next thing, I slammed the door and walked out of there. And that week, I filed all the papers for myself, alone. That's why I'm saying I wasn't such a heroine at all. It was circumstances, and it was impetuousness and hot-headedness of being 19. And the true love who waited on the other end, who was very wonderful because he sent me letters and left me information at every step of where to go, what to do, where to see, how to find housing. And that was extremely helpful. So I did it. My mother, the process was so complex. Those applying to leave not just had to go through public shaming at their place of employment. And my friend Ina is nodding because she did something like that, I'm sure. And very public, like a trial at your place of employment, at college, in high school, wherever it was that you were invested in this country. I was a chicken. I chose to withdraw from college rather than go through this. And I wrote, let's say, somewhat true requests, or not really. I said, I'm getting married and I have to move from Moscow and I'm going to marry my boyfriend in such and such city. I was going to marry my boyfriend and I was going to move out of Moscow, definitely, but they didn't need to know where. So I didn't have the public shaming process. Basically, the dean wrote my withdrawal and said, I just hope you're such a good student, you're straight A's, I hope you continue your education. I had 3 years of college by then. And thank goodness I did not wait, as my father wanted me, to finish college, wait for him to get his act together, wait for my boyfriend to get settled and be happy to help me out. If I waited for any of those things, I wouldn't be here today, and my kids wouldn't be here at all. Because what happened, so I immigrated, I got my papers together, and amazingly, I got permission to leave. 20-year-old kid in 1979. And that is very critical. Because the next year, Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, as we know, right? Youngest wouldn't let me lie. And Soviet Union immediately became a pariah among nations. Western nations boycotted 1980s Olympics in Moscow. A lot of diplomatic relations were severed. And this is what we should be doing now, instead of being best friends with them. So anyway, so Soviet Union became persona non grata in the international arena because of the invasion of a independent state. And in response, the government of the Soviet Union had to tighten the screws on whoever they had power over. So they closed the door on immigration, like shut. So a few months after I left, my father and his family, and a big family, all were refused immigration. And they were stuck. And nobody knew for how long. The greatest hero in my story is not myself at all, but my mother, who I was very close with at that time. And when I wanted to leave, it was her I was leaving most of all. And only after I became a parent myself, I sort of began to realize what a humongous sacrifice she made would never amount to anything I ever did. Because not only she signed the papers to allow me to immigrate, but she actively supported me. What it did to her, all of her further medical problems, her strokes and heart attacks, years later, I still blame on my leaving, because that was a tremendous loss for her. And at 20, I could deal with it. At 47, not so much. And in the 50s, you got heart attacks. So that was a true heroine. And the trip, this was the exit visa that I'm talking about. See, remember we didn't have passports. That was the only legal document that we were allowed. It said, Zernitskaya Olga Remirovna, my first name and patronymic, 1959, allowed to leave for permanent, this phrase, the aim of your trip, it says permanent domicile. And location, Israel, because that was the only place to go. The actual trip was pretty amazing because I had never been abroad before. So there was no diplomatic relations with Israel, which was very lucky for us, because there were two countries in Europe that took care of these refugees. You had to buy a ticket to Vienna, because Austria offered to sponsor refugees. And once you got off the plane in Vienna, again, I've never been abroad, I've never been on a foreign airline, it was amazing. Food and smiles and everybody would smile, amazing. So once you stepped off the plane, there were people with posters that said HIAS, H-I-A-S, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which was one poster. This was to offer help to Jewish refugees. Another poster said Sachnut, which is the Israeli resettlement agency for people who chose to go to Israel. Other organizations that supported refugees, like the Tolstoy Fund, the Tolstoy Foundation primarily helped Christian refugees. There were several categories of Christians that the Soviet Union denigrated, and so many of them tried to live on religious persecution grounds. And there were a couple of non-denominational groups such as IRS, International Rescue Committee. All of those groups are still here and actively involved in the refugee resettlement. HIAS, in fact, is very actively involved in the Syrian refugees and several other groups. So please be aware of it and do what you can if you can. So these organizations, you came to that lady or gentleman with a poster and say, "Hi, I'm a Jewish refugee, I want to go to America." And I said, "You sure you don't want to go to Sachnut because they will take care of you?" And said, "No, thank you." And there was a little bit of an argument, a little bit of a fight, because Israel, of course, tried to get as many souls as possible. That was the whole point. But those who want free choice, free world, free country, wow. And so the highest people arranged for a place to stay for a short while in Vienna. There were like pensions with food and couple days, sometimes couple of weeks in Vienna. And then we went on this train to go to Rome. Rome was the major point in this immigration process, where American consulate had offices, and the American consulate interviewed and decided the fate of Soviet refugees. It was a whole big deal. It's not that different than what's going on now with refugees. The vetting that you see, they've been vetted. We were vetted in Rome. My interview was awesome because I spoke English. He was so shocked. But because everybody else needed an interpreter. And while in Rome, I stayed in Rome for 6 weeks, which was paradise. Imagine, literally, 20-year-old single girl, alone, in Rome, in summer. Wow, everybody whistled at me, everybody complimented my looks. It was fantastic. And smiled. Nobody smiled in Moscow. So the American consul immediately granted me permission to come, and which was great. And my boyfriend, who was by then safely in America, called me and left me notes, and we were good to go. And this is my date, the day I arrived in America. When my boyfriend left, this is a long hair story, I tried to, like my grandmother who wouldn't sew on Saturday, I made a vow, and I'm not a Catholic as you know, but I made a vow that I would not cut my hair until I was reunited with my beloved. So this is the way I looked when I arrived to New York. And this is the best document. This is permission by the New American Association that they're accepting me, and wow, now I'm legal and I can actually be in New York. Some of these photographs, my son who's right there thought it was hilarious and posted on Facebook and said, "This is my mother, she's amazed at how many types of toilet paper," which is all true. And most of the pictures were taken to be sent to my parents in Moscow, and pictures of a supermarket with rows and rows of matzah. Remember how big a deal matzah was? And toilet paper. And the bottom document on the bottom is my naturalization certificate, which I'm very proud of and happy. That took place about 5 years after arrival. I became a citizen. And thank goodness, several years later, my parents made it out. My mother and my stepfather on the right, and my father and his wife on the left. So luckily they're all here. I have a little bit of an epilogue about what's happening with refugees now. I don't know if we want to go through this. In the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was good and bad, because on one hand, Gorbachev lessened restrictions, and many people were allowed to immigrate different places. On the other hand, the West, I think appropriately, blame me if I'm wrong, decided that, hey, they're no longer refugees, because the United States has very specific criteria of what a refugee is. And you have to be under persecution or a reasonable fear of persecution due to ethnic, religious, or sexual orientation status, things that you cannot really change. So once the former Soviet Union became nominally a democratic country, nobody could really prove reasonable fear of persecution anymore. So United States stopped accepting Soviet Jews automatically. And you had to apply more than that. The United States and several of other Western democracies opened representations in Moscow and in Leningrad. And now you could be like any other Westerner. Go to that office and apply for a refugee status or asylum or green card in your own country. So you didn't have to go through this nightmarish craziness with invitations and documents. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people got stuck because the United States started denying entry. And there became a whole other category of refuseniks who were allowed out of the Soviet Union, but not allowed into the United States. And because, first of all, there was Israel, who has a law of return, so any of these people were allowed, of course, to settle in a fully democratic sort of country of their origin. And so why would they be refugees? It led to horrendous backlog in Rome. Gazillions, like thousands of people got stuck. And again, there was activism on both sides because they were already out of the Soviet Union. They couldn't go anywhere and they refused to go to Israel. So it was terrible. So this Senator Lautenberg passed an amendment which was instrumental, almost as important as the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. And the Lautenberg Amendment that was also kind of cool. By American law, in the late 1980s, Soviet Jews were no longer refugees. One of the comments in Congress was, they're not refugees in my judgment. If you come out of a country and have access and automatic citizenship in a free country, meaning Israel, you're not a refugee. They came here because they are, quote, refugee, and they want to get benefits of being refugees. Isn't that kind of logic similar to what we hear now about refugees who are running from wars, bombs, total privation, which I certainly never had to deal with. So by 1988, there was a visa backlog of almost 10,000 people stuck at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. It grew to 40,000 by October 1989. And Hayes and all of the refugee agencies were pressuring the Congress significantly to ease up the backlog. So Senator Lautenberg from New Jersey passed the amendment that I have very mixed feelings about it, even though many people I know had directly benefited from it. I have mixed feelings because this amendment stated that Soviet Jews and several other ethnic minorities should be considered refugee due to ages of past generations who had been persecuted. Think about it. Kind of like reparations for African Americans. If we start thinking like that, it's never going to end because every minority had some horror story in their past. So I'm very dubious about this. But thank goodness it happened, and lots of people got to live in the free world, and lots of people came to America, and Canada, and Australia, and several other countries. And given Lautenberg, I actually have a poster that I added to online to my invitation to this talk. I just posted an invitation to the Lautenberg training here in Albany next week. Refugee Resettlement Agency is offering training on how to support refugees resettlement now. And it's called Lautenberg training. And this is where we are now. I'll just leave it there, no comment. And this is the end of my family story, not the end, but the epilogue to my family, which is awesome. And you met several of these people today. Unfortunately, my mom passed away 2 years ago, so she's no longer with us. But there is my father, my stepfather, my 3 sons, my awesome daughter-in-law, and the granddaughter. What else could be better? All right, this is it for me. I hope I didn't take too much time.